Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is David Arnold. I'm one of the senior trainers here at Workamajig. Today's webinar is going to be about tracking expenses and also budgeting expenses within Workamajig. Today, we're going to concentrate more on the project level, but realize again, we can always create budgets at the campaign level. And we can also create maybe a labor budget or a financial budget as well. Those are points that we will not really be covering today. I'm going to more concentrate into the project level. Okay. So the first thing we'd look at is, what is it that we're going to budget for? And everybody has a little bit different thing of what they want to track. Okay. So of course, what we would normally be tracking is if I go look at system setup, we'd obviously be tracking again, what are our expense items? So in our purchase items or in our expense report items, or we would be looking at our labor, right? What services are we going to be performing on the project? And so what do we need to budget for? Okay. I think that makes sense, right? And so again, those are the two most common. Again, we also have those in media as well. If you're doing media, we would have those media items as well that you can budget for. But the next question really comes about is to, well, how do I actually want to do the budgeting? So how we budget will obviously flow into how I see it through the system. Okay. So I'm going to look at a couple of different ways that we can budget. Okay. So the first one I'm going to do is I'm going to say a bulk estimate. Now, what do I mean by that? This is where I kind of have the number and I don't really care about what it is made up of. I just want the number. Okay. So in my examples, I'm going to have really the same project. It's just how am I going to get the budget in, and then how will that kind of feed into reporting afterwards. Okay. So the first one, again, let's start at the bulk one. Okay. So again, I have my schedule and it has some allocated hours and things like that, but I really don't need the detail. I really just like to work at a number. A common use for this would be, for example, media, right? I have media I want to buy, and do I want to put in all the detail for that, or can I just get away with just putting in that bulk number? We may also do this for some production ones, but again, it's up to you guys. But let's go ahead and look at the estimate and how I can pull that in. So I don't have any estimates right now. I'm going to go ahead and say, from the project estimate, click on the add an estimate. And just in creating the estimate, okay, I have some choices of, task and service, task only or service only. Not really recommending task and person because nothing really comes in as person for the most part. So usually we're looking at task and service, task only or service only. So now for this bulk one, well, what's the best way to get that in? And really, we can use either one, right? Any of these. It just really depends on what you would like. So again, in this case, I'm going to say task only. What does that give us when we look at bulk? So I say task only and go ahead and save. And in this case, I'm going to get labor and it's going to say, okay, here's the task, right? So in a bulk way, I really don't care where it's put. I'm just looking for the bottom line. So in a task only one, I can simply say, okay, on concepting, I'm going to expect, I'm expecting about $50,000 in labor to be there. And then my expenses, again, the idea is I don't care. I'm just saying I'm going to have expenses. I'm expecting expenses of 150,000, something like that. That makes sense. I can also put in a net and put a markup to get the expenses. But my main point is just to arrive at this $200,000. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, again, using this method of budgeting for my expenses and again, for my labor in general, again, there's some caveats to that. So now when I put in my actuals, is it going to target certain things, right? I may lose out on some of that information. And that's why we often recommend that you do both task and service to do that. But again, we understand sometimes you just need the bulk number, okay? Now, if I do it this way, again, it'll go against a task, which means it's not really going against a service. So it gets a little, or an item, and that gets a little murky, right? Then it's truly bottom line type of comparison. Nothing wrong with it. But again, you're pretty much bottom line. Let me try maybe a different one. So this may give you a little bit different. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this one. I'm going to go ahead and do another one. And in this one, I'm going to do a service only. You're saying, well, why'd you do a service only? Okay. So in this one, I still understand I need a bulk number and maybe I'm going to arrive at it. We do separate the labor and expenses. Okay. But my recommendation is what I've done is in the labor, I'm actually going to set up a a budget service. Okay. Maybe I have to add it to this. Just a second. Budget, budget, budget. Oh, there we go. Sorry, called it estimated labor. Okay, so under estimated labor, whatever you want to call this. Okay, so what I did is in system setup, I actually went in and set up a service itself, and I just called it, my budget labor, estimated labor. Don't care what it is, but I'm going to track against it, and I'm not tracking to any sales account, so it doesn't show up on an invoice. If you think you would invoice it, I would say put in a sales account and that's fine. And just make sure the name is kind of proper. I'm just using it to kind of identify it as kind of a budgeting type service. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do is also in the purchase items, expense report items, whatever you want to do. I did that same thing. I said a budget expense, right? So I can just target this one. I know it's budget expense. So at least I get this item in most of my reporting. Okay. That's the idea of having this item. It now makes it much more available into my other reports. Okay. So let's kind of go back to the estimate. So now again, I can just say estimated labor. So once again, don't care about the hours unless I do. I expect to spend 20 hours or something like that. But again, I can just put in that number that I need. So I'm arriving at 20,000, 25K in labor, right? And then when I go to my expenses, I'm going to do that same thing. Add an expense. The item is going to be that budget, right? There's my budget estimated expense. And I go ahead and put in, again, that bulk number. Maybe I'll just put in the net, expecting about, 150,000. And again, this works on markup as opposed if it's, you're talking about media, and then I'll just put in the gross and, let's say that's supposed to be 200,000. Okay. Oh, yep, it's just asking for a task. Again, not really caring about the task per se. Again, I'm just trying to get this number in so I arrive at my, not sure why that went for 200,000. There we go. Okay. So there's my 200,000. And so when I come back out, again, I arrived at the number that I needed to get at. Okay. Made it very simple. Again, I know I went through a few more steps than you were probably used to, but again, the idea is I can quickly create my estimate. If I use service only, I just say, my budget amount, put in the gross. I'm good for labor. And then how much do I expect to get expenses? Again, a bulk number. Okay. Once this gets approved, then that's what would be there, right? So again, that goes through approval, and I can send that off to the client. The client signs off on their $225,000 job. Okay, that makes sense. Now, this doesn't mean that in kind of this bulk that I can't also do something beyond that, right? So if I'm looking at my expenses again, I'll just do the service only again, like I was recommending, as opposed to task only, is that I can come into here and again, just do more of a bulk idea of I need my media items. So I can say, oh, I'm going to do some online buys. How much is that going to be worth? And again, 150,000, and we'll mark that up. We'll probably earn about 200,000 on that or something like that. Okay. Sorry, you have to pick a task. Okay. Does that make sense? So I can still actually budget in bulk to the particular thing that I'm going to buy. Okay. Okay. Now I did have a question on the task only one where I said I put the budget in, I put the expense side in the labor. And that's because it's kind of at the task. So we made it easier to just put in the kind of a bulk expense amount at that task level. That's the only reason we did it. You can still go into the expense side and put in the expenses lined out per item if you'd like, but that was just saying, on this task, how much labor, how much expense, don't care what it is, that's what we're going to put in. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So again, let me get rid of my 199 one and do that. So again, getting this kind of bulk number in is quite easy, right? I can just, uh, you know, I think it works very well with media. Again, I can pick that item type, or I can just put in how much is this contract going to be worth, and I get my numbers in so they can feed through. Okay. The next style, okay, so there's my bulk. Again, once that gets approved, I can show you this one. So let's see what that did for me. So again, you can see in my projects view now, I can see, well, what's my budget, right? Uh, this one I just put in labor, and then how much do I have left? And again, as my actuals start to feed through, they'll start to deduct, and I'd have that project budget remaining as my last column is kind of giving me what's left. So I put in hours and labor gross. I guess I should say total current budget. I forgot to get that one, just the expense gross. Okay. Okay. So again, I have this 200,000 plus 25,000. There's my budget. And then again, what are my actuals feeding through? So even though I'm using this, um, using kind of a summary level, looking at bottom line, it does feed in and I can use that data. Okay. All right. So now let's look at the other way, which is a lot more detail. Okay. So in this one, we're really looking towards budgeting task and service at that point. Now, when I look at the project, this is the way we would, recommend that you're doing this is you're coming to the schedule and you're actually fleshing out that schedule. So I created this project usually based upon the template. The template, if it has it, again, doesn't have to, but the template already has my assignments in it, right? It's saying I need an editor for a couple hours. I need a graphic designer for 3 hours. In my next step, I need a designer, a copywriter, and a content developer, right, for X number of hours as I kind of working my way through. So for this particular project, though, I may need less or more depending on what it is. So the idea of having that in your template, as you know, just allows you to, I only need to adjust the things that I need to, as opposed to going through everything and creating it from scratch, right? I need a little bit more time on this one and I'm good to go. So now that I've worked out the timing of my project, I may need more hours here. I may need more time on this spot, less time. Again, I have this all dealt with. So now I can quickly come into my, oh, forgot to say that. Okay. Now I can come into my estimate. And when I create the estimate now, I can say I want a task and service and I can auto pull the labor. So the idea is all that work I did in my schedule, I'm going to be able to pull it across and into my estimate. So I'll go ahead and pull that across. And there we go. So there's my 58 hours. If I go look at it, it's going to have it all broken down by item. That make sense? Okay, and I can do the hide zeros if I need to, but again, the idea is, again, whatever I budgeted for, that's what's going to be in here. I can further change it if I need to arrive at the number I need. Okay, that would usually be here where I'm clicking and changing this, but of course that would change the rate. It's still 3 hours, but I need it to be 390 instead of, 375 or something like that. Or I need to add $5. What do I do? Okay. And again, if you need to arrive at a number, it's kind of a weird number. This is again where we could probably come in and put it into that estimated labor. Again, I just want to use this more as my catch, right? My estimated labor. And this is where I can add my extra $5, for example. or my $15 if I need to arrive at a certain number for labor. Does that make sense? Okay. So the next stop I'm going to do, so now I have that in, and so my labor's there. So now I can do my expenses. And once again, I can do the expenses the way I would like to. But again, you're either doing the item itself, right? I'm doing either the budget one, because again, I just want that bulk number in for all my expenses, or I can pick individuals. Okay. I can say, I actually am going to do this amount of TV. I'm going to do this amount of, shipping and printing and things like that. Okay. Now, one thing we do is if we have, for example, I know printing, probably wouldn't use this for media because again, usually media has multiple vendors and I'm usually not going to put all of that into the budget. But I think printing is usually a good one that I could put in the next step I'm going to do. Okay. So again, I picked where's this is going to be, probably printing is going to be in delivery. And at this point, while it's still an estimate that's not been approved, we do have a feature called the request for quote. I'm not going to cover that today per se. We have a couple of other places that we've done that, a couple of other webinars and videos that we have. But the idea is that I can send out, what is that I need? So when I create the quote, oh, sorry, I need to save that. I can go ahead and save out the quote and I can basically send it to my different vendors and say, hey, this is the amount of printing I need. Here's the spec sheets for it, for that print job. How much? They don't have to be in the system as a Workamajig employee. It'll basically send them to a Workamajig client login page that they'd be able to see this information along with the spec sheet and put in their numbers and quantity and then say, yes, I'm good to go. Okay. So that's one way of doing that printing. You can then, once those responses come in, we can then say, yes, this is the one I accept. And that would then update the estimate. So then you can get the estimate approved and move forward. Okay. Right. So that's kind of that project, sorry, the request for quote workflow. Again, really, if you would like, are interested in that, just send us a note and we'll be happy to go through that workflow. Okay. Now, one thing we do is if you do actually use more of a detailed style, where again, I have this printing, I have certain other things, is once this is approved, okay, we'll allow the project managers usually, or the account managers, kind of up to you guys, where I would have this expense sitting here. Sorry, I probably need to unbill that. Sorry, just a second. Forgot to put a value on that. Let me get a value in here. Okay, I'll just leave it at that. So I have printing, 200,000, and I may not have approved the vendor yet, but again, I'm just capturing that. But now that my estimate is approved, I can actually come back in and say, I do need printing now. Who is going to be my vendor for that? And let's say that's just going to be, sorry, do I have a vendor for this? It's going to sound weird. I'm going to use Sprouts as my vendor. Okay. And so at this point in time, I can actually say create a purchase order from here. Okay. So this is a quick way for you to get that expense in. It's going to be all pre-filled out for me. Again, I'll be able to attach any spec sheets that are part of the project at this point in time. But again, I can just say create a purchase order. And based upon that acceptance, again, it's already filled out for me. There's the vendor. Here's the project it's going to. I'm seeing net and gross, but of course, when this gets approved or submitted to the vendor, right, it is not going to show that. So let me print that. You'll see that it just gives me the net, right, not the gross. Okay. And it's saying draft because again, it hasn't been approved internally. Okay. So a quick, easy way for you to get these purchase orders or orders out. If I had selected a media buy in here, a media item, then it would have created either the IO or BO as well. So again, we're kind of looking towards that. And most of the times usually it's purchase items that we're going to use this feature for. Okay. But is all that kind of making sense? How, again, very quickly, I got my estimate in. How do I now convert that budget amount maybe into purchase orders? Okay. I can do that again. If I'm more specific in my buying or in my estimate, I can create the purchase order from there. If I'm not very specific on it, then it's really just my normal purchasing workflow, right? I'm going to click onto it, go to purchasing, go to the purchase order, or again, if it's media, I'm doing the broadcast order, insertion order, and I'm just making sure that it's pointing towards the project. And those actuals are, of course, going to show up in the budget. Okay. Does that make sense? So let me go ahead and approve maybe this estimate. And I'll go ahead and approve that or approve that. All right. Okay. Um, yeah. So the question is it possible to create a media insertion order from the expense breakout? So yeah, let's go ahead and see what we get on that one. So again, I have my estimate. I'm just going to save it because all I'm looking for is this really. And I go to my expense and oh, I'm going to have to approve this one. So oh, I'll leave it. Okay. So I add my expense. Again, what item am I doing? There's my purchase items. Here's my IO. So I'll go ahead and put a magazine in there. That makes sense. Still grab my task. And I'm just going to grab one of my vendors here for that. Okay. And I will go ahead and put that in for, let's say it's going to be, and again, this is what's the odd part. So there's not a way for us to do the markup here. So you would have to know what my net total net is and then my total gross, okay, to arrive at the kind of the percentage, if that makes sense. Okay. So again, if you need to know the net and know the gross, go ahead and save that and approve it. And so now when I come in here and go to my expenses, see, it already says create an insertion order. Okay. Instead of create a so broadcast would say create a broadcast order, and then this would be insertion order, and then purchase order is the other one. The only one that really we wouldn't do the expense report. That doesn't make sense. Create an expense report. We'd expect other people to be doing that. Even though you can select an expense report item, we wouldn't say create an expense report. Okay. All right. So I know this is all pretty basic, right? So let's just review. So, I think my main point is whether you do things in bulk, if we do the bulk one with just a little variation, it may help with our reporting. Of course, if we do it in full detail, of course, that's going to give me that full detail. Okay. So again, other than that, again, if I'm looking here, you can start to see, oh, did I not approve my budget? Yeah, let me get rid of some, I think. Yeah. Okay. So in either case, when I'm looking at it from kind of the summary level, you can see I'm going to see the expenses coming in. I'm going to see the labor coming in. And then as actuals start to be happening, they're going to come in. And then I'm going to be able to do that calculation to say what's left. Okay. But now let's look at a different report, right? So again, I want to say, what you put in is kind of what you get out, right? So just be aware that when it comes to then reporting on, depending on which way you go, it will have an effect on how you can report out. So again, if I'm keeping it top line, when I go to my report center and I start to look at, for example, project summary data, right? So the project summary data is much like that kind of project budget screen. It's going to give me that bottom line information. And so again, it's already, okay. So here's Bob's bingo. Thought I had this set up for, and let me get a filter in here. Thought I had that set up for it. Project status. Okay, there we go. So again, you know, the data is, as you can see, it's really the same as what I had in that project view screen. Of course, when it comes to reporting, as you know, I can do a lot more with my calculations and do, maybe a percentage of you a profitability. I can get my AGI into here by doing what's been billed versus what's there. I haven't billed anything, so there wouldn't be any AGI. But again, I can do a lot more with the calculated columns to get kind of the data that I'm looking for at this summary level. And as you can see, doesn't matter if I budgeted bulk or I budgeted detail. Okay. But a bigger difference will come about when I start to look at this. So again, when I start to look at the detail, that's where things you make a decision. So in the one bulk one, I said, well, if we do a bulk one, I just did a bulk. It really wouldn't show up here because again, I didn't pick an item. So if I did the task only, what would it show for my budget? So I wouldn't get a budget for that and have a no item type of thing. But that was one of the reasons I said, hey, why don't you pick an item, do a service only one for your bulk? And in that case, I'm going to get this current budget. You can say current budget expense, right? Is that's one project. Sorry, let me uh, put these up. So again, I have this Bob's Bingo, right? That's my client. I have my current total budget. So that's my gross expense. There's my current budget gross. So I have 250,000 sitting there. If I open that up, then on each project, I'm still going to see kind of that roll up into it. And then it's when I actually click in and see those particular projects, whether it was, even though it's a bulk, if I do the bulk one correctly, I'm still going to get it here. So let me that's the expense and that's the labor. Okay. And so this was the bulk one, and yet I'm still getting my numbers filling in. Does that make sense? And why did I get that filling in? Because I just happened to pick a service and called it estimated labor, and that got me that number there. So now I see that kind of as a budget number throughout, okay, for this item. So if I'm looking at task, because this was against a task, I would see that task that budgeted. Does that make sense? If I'm looking bottom line, I get to see it. If I look at it detailed like this one, this is looking at every item that's on there. Even though my actuals are not part of this, right? At least I kind of get a bottom line calculation, but I can always do this within the services, say, this is my budget for labor. This is my budget. This is my actuals that are feeding in. Does that make sense? Okay. And so that was the one where I said a bulk one. And again, if I did it purely bulk, where I did it more at the task level, I would have lost this budget information because again, this one it happens to be looking at the items and services. And of course, when I do the full detail one, that fills in absolutely correctly. I didn't say block the zero, so sorry for all the zero stuff. Okay, so again, I have this postage. There's my expense for postage. Here's my magazine, right? Information coming in. And then I actually put in some timer. Here's my budgeted for all these other things. And then here's my actuals feeding in. So I can always see this kind of budget versus actual. And then my bottom line would be, again, if I did this kind of this bulk estimated labor or bulk estimated expense, it would, again, still get me that budget number in there. Okay. All right. And a question about what reports am I using? Just to give you a heads up. So that's why I left it here. Project item slash services. That's the data set I used in creating a report. I come into new and then again search for that particular data set. So this was project item and services. And then I just renamed it so we could kind of look at it. Okay. Yeah. If you need any help with these, I can always, I can if you send me a note to support and ask for them, I can give you these, but these are pretty, simple reports. Just ask us what you'd like and we're happy to help you in getting those created. Okay. And the more for a demo period, demonstration of saying, hey, if I budget in this bulk kind of way, but I make a little tweak to that bulk, right? It's going to let me get the information I want kind of at both levels, whether in one project I do detail or another project I do, more of these bulk numbers. So kind of that no matter what, it's going to feed into my reporting properly. All right. Okay. So again, this is kind of like I said, this is more looking at, what did I do on this project? What are the items that I had in? Again, don't worry about all the stuff that's zeros. Again, there would be filters to take those out, but like, the idea is just more that it does show up here. Okay. Now, again, how am I doing my estimates? Sorry, I create my estimates in the right way. I do my purchase orders. That again hits my actuals that are coming through. Let's kind of go back to the project again. So again, as I start to track those expenses in, again, uh, those will start to register. Now, we see expenses in a couple of different ways. So if it's an order, right, we're still going to see that order here, right? It's going to be part of the cost gross. Okay. So we will still see it as part of the order. And then once you put in the vendor invoice, okay, the vendor invoice will just kind of take over the spot of that open order, so to speak, and close that value out and replace it with the vendor invoice. Okay. And I can show you that here. I believe I have one. So again, I think we saw how to do an order. Is that, or would you like me to kind of go through a quick way of doing an order? I think we did one for this all expenses here. Quickest way is come into this, and here we have our approved one. And there's my order right there. I have that insertion order for big media. Uh, Click into that. That gets approved. That again shipped out to the vendor. The vendor does it. The vendor now sends me in a vendor invoice. Okay. So right now, since it's an order, this amount, this 25K, is still registering in the project, and it's considered an open amount, open order amount. Okay. Right. So the next one would be, of course, a vendor invoice comes in against it. That's pretty straightforward. Again, plus, usually your purchasing person would say, do the plus. Personally, I'm going to create a vendor invoice. Who's the vendor? And I'm going to say BMC in this case. Right? That's my big media company. If I know the order, again, I can pick it, but oftentimes the vendor invoice has multiple orders on it. Hopefully they are identifying that for you. So again, you can pick one and it's very specific, or again, you can, just hold off on this part and we'll wait until the next screen. Okay. And so what's the invoice number in here? Very simple. Whatever's on that piece of paper, you put it in. The invoice date would be what's ever on that piece of paper or PDF or whatever, right? Selecting that. Again, I won't have to pick a project because the order already has the project. Okay. If you wanted to at this point, if you got a PDF, you downloaded that, you could upload that PDF to here before you even do your first save. Or again, you can do it after the fact as well on the next screen. Okay. So now I go next. Here's the initial header information for the vendor invoice. I go to the plus icon and it says, hey, I have purchase orders, insertion orders, and broadcast orders for this vendor. Which one do you want to add? And I know that that was an insertion order, right? And I think it was, let's see. I'm terrible at this. I'm all right. 1059. Thanks. 7, 1059. So here's my 1059. Okay. I select that op because I know that that's what this one's against. And so really in this screen, we're really dealing with, I always say there's always 3 fields, right? First is I'm going to check it off because I want to make sure this is the line that I'm putting my vendor invoice against. Okay. The next I'm going to do is, again, put in the open net. That's what's on the vendor invoice. So I see that it's 25K. Is that vendor invoice for 25K or is it for less? Okay. So less or more, that's kind of the point. So if it's for less, we're going to go ahead and say, yep, it was for only 10,000 because they're going to probably send us two. The system is going to remember that there's 10,000. Okay. And there's a remaining balance of 15 because it's always going to remember what was my original buy versus what this is coming in for. Okay. Kind of the main third one is depending on billing. So if you had already pre-billed this order, and I'm not discussing that here, but if you had pre-billed the order, I would have an amount that would be available to pre-bill that. Or if there's a difference, I would get that. But there you go. So it's basically going to put the billable amount on the vendor invoice, if that makes sense. Okay. Now, the other side is if I say, well, this is the final invoice for it, and this is the only other field I check, I can say, yep, this is the final invoice. And it's only for 10,000. Even though I ordered 25, this is the only invoice I'm going to get for it. And that would close out that order line as well. But if I just leave it like this, it's going to say, hey, I'm expecting another vendor invoice for somewhere around $15,000. That's absolutely fine. Go ahead and hit save. That comes out here. What's my median, the gross? Sorry, I must have that as billable. Again, I brought over how much to bill and I said 0, but that could have easily been, I want to bill, $30,000 or something like that. Does that make sense? Oh, that's 300. Okay. So again, we're kind of keeping track of this. And then this would then, since that's saved, that's what I expect to pay the vendor, which would be this amount. And then because there's going to be an amount to bill, that's going to be that gross or the amount to bill. Although the gross does not always have to equal the amount to bill, that can always be different. Okay. But it came in for this amount. And then what did you bill? That's a different question. But again, we're going to track that. When I come into that gets approved and posted, that goes in. When I create another one for that, maybe that same vendor, and this one time I'm going to actually pick that order, okay, and whatever that number is and say next, you'll see that the system remembered that I already had a vendor invoice. That's the full amount. And now it's for 15,000. So now it's a matter of what is that final amount for, right? Or is there going to be another invoice? If it's equal, I don't have to check the clear, but I'm going to check the box. I'm going to put in the value that they put in, right? Right. So it came in for a little bit more. That would be up to you guys to say, is that correct or not? And then I can go ahead and say, yes, that's the final invoice and go ahead and save that. And that has gone back to that order and closed those lines out for me. Okay. Again, goes through its own approval process. Okay. If you need to. And again, we expect that to get approved. Okay. And then again, does it get posted right away? Again, that depends on your guys' workflow. Okay. If I can kind of post a question to you guys, if you get a couple of responses in your purchasing workflow, is it the project manager who enters in the vendor invoices and then submits them to approval? Or is it more an AP person takes care of it, takes care of everything, and only if there's a question do they bring it to the attention of the project manager or account manager? Okay, see, yep, at least one says no, accounting does everything. Okay. Um, and for those that are doing, again, accounting is who deals with it. Again, submitting it for approval so that I can kind of look at it and say, yes, that's correct. When it comes to approval, just to show you, uh, I can select the approver, right? So again, I put it in, right? But then I can go ahead and say, oh, actually, I need, Bob to have a look at this. And when I submit it, it'd go to Bob. Now, Bob may have limited access to the vendor invoices, if that makes sense, but it would show up in the bell, and then Bob could then click on it and say, yes, I approve this. Okay. Maybe even edit it if that's what need be, or then Bob can see it and say, yeah, that looks great, and turn it back to the person, if that makes sense. So again, then he changes the approver and says, submit, that's what he would have. The other is, again, we have conversations associated with this. So you can send a conversation saying, hey, Bob, what do you think of this invoice? And that would be in his bell to respond to. It would come back into here. And again, you would see those conversations back and forth regarding this particular vendor invoice. Okay. And again, you see that, once it's attached, you could attach that PDF that you have of the original invoice that they sent you. Okay. Okay. So that is really, as I know this was kind of maybe a blur for you guys. I just wanted to make sure that you knew there's a place to track depending on how you want to do your budgets. And then how you do your budgets is how it will then feed into reporting when we start to compare budget versus actual. So the two reports that I provided, that I displayed, are simply one's the project item and service. The other is project summary. This is much like that, the project view list, except I can do a little bit more with the calculated columns and groupings and stuff. That's the difference in between those two. But again, this is more bottom line. This is more just looking at, again, budget versus actual at the item level, or the service and item level. Okay. There may be a couple of other reports that you may want to look at. Again, I'm adding one and just calling it project cost transaction. Okay, and you can see that I have several variations. Project cost transaction is really looking at expense, right? Expense versus and labor versus budget, but it's the actual transaction. I put a time entry in, I put a vendor invoice in. The one with open orders, that kind of lets us see the orders that are open. They have a vendor invoice against it, but there's still an open order amount right on it. Just like I did before, right? I had a $25,000 line, but I only took in a $10,000 invoice. So it's still open, if that makes sense. And so that open order amount would still be visible in this one. Now, this one actually takes a transaction to actually show up. So again, I know I'm budgeting for that off one. That this one would not show that, because again, I'm not putting an actual time entry or an expense entry against my bulk item. Does that make sense? So it's not really a transaction against the project. So that's the difference in that one. Okay. Now, of course, when I start to look at my financial ones, right? It will still show up in these. So again, project budget analysis, I think you guys have used that before. Again, that's going to be much like the project summary data. So of course, any budget that you have in there will show up. Okay. If I start to look at true financial reports, and I do, for example, my client P&Ls and project P&Ls, again, because I put it toward, it does have a budget. So that's going to definitely, show up in both of the client and in the project level P&Ls. Okay. All right. Now, as far as maybe you have some time analysis reports that are looking at certain things. Again, some of the time detail data, that's probably not going to show it because um, you do not have a time entry, and that's looking at time entries. So for the time analysis ones, those time ones, we may have to look into probably that project item and service. That's probably the best one. It may even be the project task data, where I'm kind of looking at that. Because the assignment is not allocated, that it may not pick that one up as either, right? So again, that could be the caveats, but again, doing those bulk items. Okay. All right. And that's really all I have for you. I hope this was informative for you. If you do have any questions, again, support@workamajig.com. Okay. Now let me just make sure I kind of tagged on to everything that we have. Okay. Yeah. Are there any questions? Okay. And again, it seems like for no one else really responded, but I know there's kind of a mix of people where accounting or the AP person takes care of the vendor invoices. It's only when that we're demonstrating there's a difference, right? And it would be really be up to your team to decide what is that difference, right? Some is if there's a penny difference, it's off to the project manager saying, what's the difference? Others say, well, it's a 5-10% difference. We'll accept that. Again, it's up to you guys to set that, what is your percentage of discrepancy before you say it goes back to the account manager or project manager, or going to talk to the vendor about it. But hopefully, again, if it's more, then it's definitely a stop. That's a definite red flag. Why is it more than my order? And again, it might just be you forgot to put in, shipping or something like that, or you didn't include taxes or something like that. Okay. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, thank you very much for your time. I do appreciate it. If you have any questions, again, support at workamajig.com. If you'd like to set up some time with your account manager or, me specifically, if you would like to talk about reporting and what, feel free to send in a note, again, support at Workamajig, and just ask that. Those will come into my inbox. Okay. All right. Thanks again and have a great rest of the day. I know we have another webinar coming up shortly with regarding a new integration with a tax service. If any of you guys have signed up for that, I hope you enjoy that. All right. Thanks again and have a great rest of the day. Appreciate it.